Hey, it's me, Toli. I know that there's a couple of local or smaller musicians watching my videos, even if the majority of the people that are occasionally watching my videos are watching these videos primarily because of my covers. I know that there's still some musicians on here, not the bigger ones. The bigger ones are pretty much lucky, and most of the time they're lucky. And this video is probably not for them, as they're in a way better position than the average musician is. This video is primarily for the smaller musicians who sometimes feel as if they're hitting the wall at some stage. It's a situation that I've encountered many times with loads of my projects. And when I'm talking about these kinds of things, I probably think that I'm talking from experience. There's many facts on why you may hit the wall in your personal situation when making music. There's people like singers and songwriters. And those of you who are singers or songwriters, the majority of the time you are on your own. You're writing your songs on your own. You're writing all these melodies on your own. You're writing the vocals on your own. So you don't have the struggle of keeping the whole band together or a whole project. Now, whether this is an advantage or not, it is solely up to you, because the main advantage is that you're not depending on anyone. You can work on all of your projects on your own. Maybe you even can record and mix and master on your own if you're good enough and have some experience in these parts of the whole production. Because especially for small musicians, it is incredibly important to be able to do as many tasks as possible independently from external services and try to avoid external help as often as possible. Just because it's so costly. Not because it isn't good, but the cost factor for one single person is way higher than for instance, a band project consisting of 4 or even 5 people. The majority of the problems arise when you're working in a project with a couple of people. And this is what my projects personally were in the past. Majority of my projects were band projects. I obviously also did some solo projects. And the advantage that I perceive from these solo projects in direct comparison to these bands or projects consisting of multiple people is that you can work on your own time schedule. And this is for me personally, this was the main advantage. Now, obviously, when I'm doing content just like this, like video content, besides my other projects, my solo project has a rather low priority. And this is what I oftentimes regret. But I don't have to deliver anything to anyone. This is literally my own project, and I don't have any schedule to work upon and to deliver a project to fulfill the needs of other people. In my other projects, excluding the first couple of projects, but in most of my other projects, I was the person who had the main idea for the project and wanted to get every single of those projects as far as possible. Now, what you need to understand is that, especially in smaller bands being formed in local areas, many people like the idea of being in a band, of playing on a stage, of probably getting all the girls or whatever idea the people may have. But this is the main drive that the people have, the main idea behind a band project, to be cool, to earn some reputation, and all these kinds of things. This may have been the case 20 years ago when bands were actually a cool thing. Today, making music alone is not the coolest thing to do. Because nowadays the main reason to make music is to make it for your heart primarily, simply because it's not that cool anymore. The coolness in making music lies in other factors. I can talk about my experiences in playing in metalcore or melodic hardcore and hardcore punk bands. When initially the hardcore punk scene was a scene of tolerance, over the years, when I got into the scene, it was already this kind of scene where you needed to have a certain look and have tattoos and have a certain style, certain type of clothing. So it became absolutely the opposite of what hardcore punk was intended to be. And it's pretty sad that I didn't really get the gist of what it actually meant to be in the hardcore punk scene. But in my era, when I started to hear this kind of music, I wasn't about the style. I was all about the music because I simply like this heavy and harsh type of music, which still could deliver some types of emotions that I could connect to, that I could feel literally. Now, when I got into these bands, one of my first projects where I wasn't the most dominant person, there was the singer, and literally the first thing he said to me and one of my buddies who also joined the band was, we need to have a style conformity. We need to represent a certain type of appearance and have a certain type of style on our photos and how we can literally market ourselves. Now, he was this typical, I would call him some kind of proto-hipster. At that time, this whole hipster scene was incredibly big, and I don't even think that it was a bad idea to improve on our styles and our clothing, because especially my clothing at that time wasn't coherent at all. But unfortunately, this was the only thing he cared about, how we appear to the public, without even contributing anything else to the band. He didn't even contribute lyrics to the band or did barely anything to bring the band forward. And the rest of the band, consisting of 4 people, these were the actual people that wrote the songs. And if you want to hear one of the songs, by the way, you can watch my production series, because I'm covering one of those songs thoroughly in this series. But this was the first band project, and all of the people in this project were older than I was. So I didn't feel as if I could actually direct all these people in a certain direction. I was just happy to have a complete band, and was secretly hoping that this would be the first project that I could get on the stage one with. Now, unfortunately, it didn't turn out that well, and I never got into a single stage with this project. But it was an interesting experience nonetheless. It's been an experience that I had the opportunity to learn from. And when I got into my next bands, I also had a couple of new connections, because this is another important thing about local projects and hitting the wall, is that people from local projects tend to often most avoid making new connections to people, especially when they're not from your particular region. This was the main advantage that I had. And when we moved on and created another band project, I became one of those people who kind of had a vision for the next band project. Next band project has been, initially it's been post-rock, but when it turned and switched to be melodic hardcore, and we kind of switched up some roles, got new band members to this project, we made the move or the switch to melodic hardcore as a genre. And I developed my vision even further. I mean, the other people also had the wish, especially our first singer, had this vision for this band, and sometimes this would lead to clashes and ego problems. I never would say that I don't have an ego myself. Every single person has his ego, every single artist especially. But what you need to learn as an artist, as a small artist, is to work with this ego and try to learn to avoid conflicts. This works out pretty good when you learn to talk with other band members instead of keeping everything to yourself, and you learn to criticize not emotionally but rationally, because this often can lead to additional problems, especially when you have fragile egos in your band projects. This is one of the points. Fragile egos or having a fragile ego or an incredibly strong ego is a point that you need to work on when being in a small regional band. And what I mentioned earlier, you need to be able to make contacts with other bands and people that are kind of in the music scene or kind of connected to the music scene, because every single band needs to have, I would say, a small team of people that are able to at least create some recordings. If you don't have these people, you need to pay for services, external services. This is obvious. The same goes to having a photographer or a person who can make images or photos of you, maybe even a videographer. But if you also don't have any of those two, or don't have to contact to people that are giving it out for free, I have insanely huge respect for every single of those people giving out this kind of work for free, because usually it is paid work to do images for artists or for doing videos, music videos for artists. But the reality is that most smaller artists don't have the proper money to pay for these kinds of things. Many smaller artists tend to opt out to the possibility of doing everything on their own, and which leads most bands or artists to create their recordings on their own. This is not always a good idea, I'm being honest with you. And also images and music videos. I mean, it definitely can be a good idea if you at least understand a certain amount of these things. But when I'm looking around and when I see what bands nowadays tend to release, there's many categories of bands, and there's bands who you look at, you instantly recognize that they're a regional or a smaller band, especially here in Germany, but their quality is at least on par with the smaller international acts. Their photos, and these photos are usually made externally by people who actually know how to make these photos, and their videos are all of good quality, and also the recordings are of good quality. And sometimes these people do all of these things on their own. This was also kind of my path, because I knew, well, we don't have any money, and I have a couple of people in my band projects that don't want to invest money. They probably don't have the money either. I didn't ask in particular. But what I wanted, just as many artists tend to do, is to do everything on our own. We've organized or found people to make photos for us, because I wasn't that big into photography at that time. But one of the main things that I've wanted to make on my own was recording the band. At that point, I didn't really know that I'm digging out an insanely huge rabbit hole that I can't really get out of that fast anymore. So now I'm sitting here with a small mixing and recording and mastering studio. It turned out to be, at least when you're working on these kinds of things consistently, it turns out after a couple of years, in a good way, because you can use this skill to use it on all of your projects. You need to keep in mind that you pay for all this equipment, but if you're paying for all this equipment only to bring up one single project, it's maybe better for you personally or for your wallet to simply invest in a service, But if you know that you're gonna be recording music as long as possible, maybe your entire life, then this kind of investing this money into this kind of equipment is maybe not the worst idea. And this is also what happened with all this camera equipment that I have over the years. I've started to gain some interest in videography and all this kinds of stuff. And this is why I bought myself a couple of cameras. But the downside is somebody of your band, if you're doing single shots, needs to be able to kind of hold the camera at least and have a certain amount of skill to be able to generate aesthetically pleasing raw material that you can cut into a final clip. And luckily enough, in my current in one of my current projects I have, or in a couple of my current projects, I have these kinds of people. So it's pretty cool to have this equipment because nowadays content creation is also an important point. So you need to have skilled people to create content and create an image of your band that you want to represent to the public. And if you don't have these kinds of people, you need to buy services externally. This is one of the other points. So we've got ego, we've got the skill, but the next point is the visual aspect. Even if you're able to write good music and if you're able to create insanely good content at an insanely high quality, which means audio, video, images, photography, and have a good social media presence, there's one factor that unfortunately many bands don't really get. When you're making hardcore punk or metalcore, you're at an insanely huge advantage if you're looking good. Now, there's genres such as baddiecore, if you've heard this term already. If you watch Nick Nocturnal or other YouTubers, you may already have heard it. All these kinds of bands that are defined by this new term, they have some aesthetic to them. So either they're insanely good looking or they're have an insanely huge amount of tattoos and are at least average looking. So they, in the end, they have a certain look, a certain aesthetic to them that I can represent throughout their videos and throughout their photos, and they can use in order to gain interest all over their social media platforms. There's many bands locally who are, their main priority is to be as tattooed as possible, to get on the stage again and to look as cool as possible. This is one of the main reasons to make music for many people and has been for eternity. This is one of the main reasons for bands to make music and to get onto the stage and to look as cool as possible, being all tattooed and this kind of stuff. But unfortunately, many bands tend to lack the skill, on the other hand. Many of these bands. You need to kind of find a balance because all of this nowadays is unfortunately important. It's not enough to simply be able to play an instrument. You simply need to, it's a good thing to look at the TikTok and Instagram reel trends. When you see what reels are trending on my For You page, on Instagram, TikTok, not that much, but there's pretty much the same content all over TikTok right now. But on Instagram, I get all these kinds of guitarists that are playing their guitar, and they have a certain aesthetic to them. They have these dark and mysterious appearances, or these mysterious videos, and are playing these heavy and dark riffs, and all are absolutely fully tattooed. Maybe some people will get offended by this because they think, hey, he's defining that you need to be fully tattooed in order to gain some popularity in the scene. And I even heard stories about labels paying their artists for them to get covered up in tattoos in order to be market it properly to the audience. Unfortunately, I don't have any links or references right now, but maybe if I will find a reference, I will post it down below. I found it quite interesting, but it's quite understandable because as a listener in our Western society, but it's still on the same path, even in countries such as Russia, for instance, it's nearly the same that people are getting more and more into this kind of aesthetical thing. But in the Western sphere or on the Western market, it's incredibly important to fulfill the needs and expectancies of the listener. And if the majority of the people are used to listen to maybe throughout their entire time, they have listened to 300, 400 bands, and of these 300, 400 bands, 250 to 300, at least the majority of the members were fully covered in tattoos and had a fitting appearance. Then when they're listening to the next band and they're looking kind of as if they're not fitting into the genre, the average person will think, okay, there's something slightly different about these guys, and potentially not in a good way, because this aesthetic contributes to the whole appearance, as I've already said. So this is the other point that you need to keep in mind. And you need to find, as an artist, you need to find a balance of these three things. And even then, it's pretty unfortunate because from my experience, after Corona, as a small artist, it's been incredibly difficult to get some reputation because all the algorithms are working against you, basically. You need to have that special something in order to gain some interest of the public, in order to give all these social media algorithms the signal that you could be potentially interesting for these and that kind of people, so that your content gets recommended to these kinds of people. Even if you're thinking about buying ads on these platforms, virtually the first thing that people will see, they will hear the first couple of notes in their attention span of about 2 to 5 seconds. Nowadays, the people have an attention span of 2 to 5 seconds. I don't know where it's actually at in 2024, but it's a couple of seconds. And these couple of seconds, you need to fulfill the expectancy of the listener or your potential listener on an aesthetic level, and you need to fulfill the expectancy on a sound level. So it needs to sound good, needs to look good, and needs to be catchy. All in these couple of first seconds that they can swipe further or actually click on your ad or not. And this is kind of unfortunate, but it's the unfortunate reality that we're living in. So you either have the choice of playing on a local sphere, on a local level with your band and trying to be happy with what you got over there. Or if you want to grow actually and want to get bigger, want to have more and more listeners, you need to engage with all these people throughout social media. You need to connect with people outside of your local region. You need to connect with musicians in other cities. And if you feel as if you don't, especially if you feel as if you don't have good musicians around you anymore, this is a feeling that I've also had in my past, you need to try to find new project outside of your region, your city. That's it. Hope you had fun.